So we heard about sewage diplomacy in the first session. And one thing that was common, or that's connecting the first session and the second session, is this thing called nitrogen. So that's really the common thread between the first session and this current session. And we want to explore this question through a nitrogen lens. And the question is, how do we, I'm sure for those of you who are in the shipping industry, you are aware that shipping moves around 80% of the world's trade. And we know about decarbonizing in the industry. So as new fuels emerge, we face an important question. Can we reduce emissions without creating new environmental pressures elsewhere? So that's really the conversation that we're going to have within the next few minutes. And it's really about making sure that our transition to cleaner shipping works for climate, it works for oceans, it works for communities, that depend on this. So that's really what we're going to focus on. So I would like to kick off by starting off with our chief guest, our keynote speaker for this session. She hardly needs introduction in these circles. Why? Because she's been one of the most influential voices on maritime governance, the blue economy, and international shipping. She has helped to shape conversations at the International Maritime Organization and continues to champion African leadership in the global ocean agenda. Please join me in welcoming Ambassador Nancy Karigithu. Thank you.
Wow. Okay, that got you up. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ocean champions, colleagues, and friends, karibuni Mombasa, or welcome to Mombasa, to the Swahili coast. Let me start by saying what a privilege and distinct pleasure it is for me to see you gathered here with you on the shores of the Indian Ocean for the first time ever that Our Ocean Conference is being held on African soil. For generations, this coastline has been a place of arrival and departure, of dhows and monsoon winds, and of trade carried on the same ocean that has fed our communities and shaped our cultures. This conference, Our Ocean, Our Future, is more abstract slogan. Rather, it is our inheritance and our responsibility. So the focus of our gathering is on recent global conversations on oceans and their importance to us in this room. Maritime shipping, the carrier of over 80% of global trade, is currently undergoing a profound transition. As one of the 6 largest emitters of greenhouse gases, international shipping is under increasing pressure to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions and contribute meaningfully to global climate objectives. While it is also 6th largest emitter of greenhouse gases at roughly 3%, this is the equivalent of Germany's emissions. So it begins to tell you how important this conversation is. For the first time, the international community has designed a global regime to change that. The IMO Net Zero Framework that sets global rules to combine a binding limit on the carbon intensity of marine fuels with a price on emission applied across an entire global industry. Approved in principle just over a year ago, it offers a path toward net zero shipping by around 2050. And then, last October, the world hesitated. The session convened to adopt that framework was adjourned for a year under intense political pressure. And now, IMO member states are set to reconvene on this matter this coming October. So let's pose the question, what does that mean? And I want to suggest that this is just a pause. It's not a defeat. But it is a pause we cannot afford to waste. Every month of uncertainty weakens the business case for the clean fuels we know we will need. And it sends a mixed signal to the producers, the financiers, and the ship owners who are eagerly waiting for a clear direction before they can invest. The work of the coming months, the technical guidelines, and the consensus building will decide whether the next Marine Environment Protection Committee session at the IMO delivers a framework that is real or one that is hollow. So that is the global stage. Now let me bring us back to the specific question that gathers here in this room. If we are to decarbonize shipping, we need fuels that do not burn carbon. And in response to this challenge, a range of alternative fuels are being explored and developed to support the decarbonization of the sector. And among these, ammonia has emerged as one of the leading candidates due to its potential as a low carbon fuel. Ammonia has emerged as one of the most serious candidates, yes, because it contains no carbon at all. Burned in a ship's engine, it releases no carbon dioxide. It can be stored, it can be moved at scale. And on paper, that looks like a good answer to our problem. But then the ocean does not deal in paper, and neither should we. Ammonia is a nitrogen molecule. When we burn it, or when it leaks in production, in storage, at the bunkering point, or as unburnt slip from the engine, it releases reactive nitrogen back into our air and our water. And the most consequential of this is nitrous oxide, a greenhouse gas with more than 270 times the warming power of carbon dioxide. It also depletes the ozone layer, and alongside it come nitrogen oxides and ammonia slip, pollutants that degrade air quality, and when they settle on the sea, feed the nutrient pollution that starves coastal waters of oxygen. And ladies and gentlemen, here is the finding on which we should focus our attention. Recent science tells us that ammonia, used as a marine fuel, could reduce reactive nitrogen pollution by around 2/3 compared with conventional fuel oil, or it could increase it by nearly 200%. The same fuel. The difference between these two outcomes is not chemistry we cannot control. It is leakage that we fail to contain and emissions we choose not to abate. And from that scientific knowledge, it is clear that ammonia is not by itself a clean fuel. It is a fuel, yes, that can be made clean through how it is produced, how tightly it is contained, and whether the engine that burns it is fitted to capture what it emits. And the encouraging news is that the technology to do this largely exists. Engine manufacturers are already demonstrating that nitrous oxide can be cut to very low levels with the right combustion controls and catalysts, achieving emission reductions of over 90% against diesel. The barrier, therefore, is not invention. It is whether the rules require it. And that is where this conversation meets policy. If the world's new fuel standard measures only the carbon coming out of the funnel, it will declare ammonia clean. Yet, it will worsen the climate and harm the sea. We must therefore insist on a life cycle approach, well to wake, that accounts for every greenhouse gas and every reactive nitrogen emission from the moment the fuel is made to the moment that it is burned. Anything less is not decarbonization, it is displacement, moving the harm from the atmosphere to the ocean and from the carbon ledger to the nitrogen one. And for Africa, this is not a distant technical debate. We are coastal nations. The reactive nitrogen that escapes a poorly managed ammonia value chain does not stay in the shipping lanes. It falls on the reefs, the mangroves, and the fisheries that feed our people. We are here at this conference to protect this ocean. We cannot, in the same breath, endorse a fuel pathway that endangers the same ocean. This year's conference theme, Our Ocean, Our Heritage, Our Future, is particularly relevant to the discussion before us today. Heritage is not only what we inherit from past and previous generations, it is equally what we pass on to the next generations. And as such, our pursuit of maritime decarbonization must ensure that solutions designed to reduce our environmental impact do not inadvertently create new challenges for our oceans and coastal community. So, ladies and gentlemen, this session, Climate and Nitrogen Implications of Alternative Fuel Pathways for Maritime Shipping, calls upon us to critically examine the environmental consequences associated with emerging fuel technologies and to also ensure that our pursuit of climate solutions remains comprehensive, science-based, as well as sustainable. Africa has too often been cast as the observer in these negotiations, affected by decisions made elsewhere, present at the table, but not shaping what is on it. And that is changing. Through initiatives like the LEAP project series and the Partner Initiative, African technical experts are now producing the evidence and the analysis that allow our continent to negotiate as architect of global maritime policy, not as recipients of it. More than 100 specialists are now part of that network, and this is how a continent moves from being acted upon to acting. And we hold something the world needs. Green ammonia, the genuinely clean kind made from renewable electricity, requires abundant solar, wind, and hydrogen potential. And Africa has all three in great supply. And the fuel that powers the world's ships in 2050 could as well be produced here on this continent, creating jobs, building ports, and generating value where it has too often only been extracted. And that is the opportunity. It will only materialize if the global rules reward clean production and if the finance reaches us through the IMO Net Zero Fund, through climate finance, through partnerships that treat African nations as producers and partners, not merely as markets. Communities located near ports and coastlines often bear the greatest burden of environmental externalities. From the Swahili coast, the Gulf of Guinea, harbors of Southeast Asia and beyond, coastal populations depend heavily on healthy marine ecosystems for their livelihood, food security, and economic well-being. And it is therefore imperative that the transition to alternative fuels is accompanied by robust safeguards that protect both people and the environment. So the transition must therefore be just. It must be a transition that decarbonizes the ships of the wealthy. It must not be a transition that decarbonizes the ships of the wealthy while bypassing the people of the coast. That is not a transition we should accept. It must be inclusive, it must be equitable, and it must be aligned with what our people actually need: livelihoods, development, and a living ocean. So as we go from this room into the negotiations ahead, let me leave you with what I ask of all of us. Adopt the framework this October and adopt it with integrity. Build a fuel standard that ensures robust carbon and nitrogen accounting, require the abatement we already know how to deliver, and make sure that the value of this transition flows to the communities and the continents that have contributed least to the problem and that have the most to offer in solutions. So to finish, our ocean, our heritage, our future, let us make sure that the future we build for shipping is one that this ocean can survive and one that this coast can share in, as in many others. Asanteni sana.
Thank you so much, Madam Ambassador. Another big hand for her, please. Thank you, thank you. And to segue into a similar conversation, as we get the presentations ready. Yeah, so, and as shipping moves towards alternative fuels, I think one question that continues to haunt many of us is, are we reducing one form of pollution while creating a new environmental risk somewhere else? I think that's a concern in this room. And so our next speaker has been at the forefront of helping ports and maritime stakeholders to navigate this question. So as we get the presentation ready. All right, thank you for your patience. So I was saying our next speaker has been at the forefront of helping ports and maritime stakeholders navigate this question around reducing one form of pollution without creating environmental risk elsewhere. So please help me in welcoming Dr. Lucy Gilliam, Co-Executive Director of One Planet Port. A big hand, please. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I'm Lucy Gilliam. I run a small NGO in the Port of Rotterdam. I've kind of got a foot in kind of both worlds. So my background, I'm an environmental scientist, and I studied for my PhD in postdoc nitrogen cycling in a different system in agricultural soils. But so I come from the world from the previous session, but now I work in the maritime policy space. And so I work on shipping decarbonisation. So with that in mind, because I've been involved in both spaces, I thought I had a kind of I wanted to think about what joins the last session, which was all about sewage pollution and what we can do to innovate and create value from sewage, and what links it with the question that we're going to explore right now. And I wondered to myself, how many embassies of nutrient pollution is one uncontrolled ammonia ship? So I did a little back of the envelope calculation, which will come up in a second. Anyone want to already shout out how many embassies they think one ship might be? No one want to hazard a guess? Well, in my back of the envelope calculation, I figured that it was 3,000 to 4,000 embassies could be one uncontrolled ship. So basically what I'm trying to say here is don't look too closely at the numbers. It's not very precise, but the idea is to give a sense of scale. Ships are some of the biggest machines that we produce. And if we switch to a fuel and we don't control those emissions, we could have a very big source of nutrient pollution to our environment. So I wanted to join the dots between these two sessions. So why does reactive nitrogen need to be managed? Well, we've already heard this from previous speakers, but one of the big things is it causes eutrophication. So it can cause algal blooms. It can cause decomposition that strips oxygen from the waters. It can create hypoxic dead zones and kill fish. We've got areas of dead zones that already exist in areas where we've got heavy shipping traffic. Think of the Baltic, the Gulf of Mexico, the Arabian Sea. These are seas that really have no nutrient pollution. Also, ammonia is directly toxic. It kills the marine life, it's a hazard to seafarers, it can harm corals, and the thresholds are actually very low. Finally, we've also heard about this before, nitrous oxide. Any form of reactive nitrogen can end up in a nitrogen cascade that ultimately ends up as nitrous oxide, an incredibly potent greenhouse gas that is rising and we need to control. So these are the reasons why we mustn't just have carbon limits. We must look at the decarbonisation pathways through the nitrogen lens as well. So we heard in the previous session about the water sector, about reactive nitrogen there, and we know that we can strip reactive nitrogen through all sorts of processes before discharge, and we know what the goals are there. We know that solutions exist. They might not be being implemented enough. We know that we need innovation, but we've got sewage diplomacy and they're on the path. With shipping, this is something that hasn't become a problem yet. We don't use ammonia in ship engines yet, but it's anticipated that this fuel by 2050 could be powering the majority of large ships. And if that was to happen, we could increase reactive nitrogen by 50% on top of what we've already got. So we can't do that because we've got commitments. We're supposed to be halving nitrogen pollution by 2030. We're not meeting that goal. We cannot afford to have a new source of reactive nitrogen. And we can get reactive nitrogen losses all the way through the supply chain. And where you're using ammonia on ships, it's happening at the water's edge. So, it's happening at the water's edge on the high seas. That's why this is an oceans issue. And we need to have governance to prevent the solution making a new problem. So where in the supply chain does risk arise? Well, really, it's all the way through the value chain. Reactive nitrogen can escape at every stage, through spills and venting to water, as nitrous oxide, as NOx emissions, or as unburnt ammonia slip to the air. This can happen at production. So ammonia losses in the production plants. We have inventories of how much losses are in production. Those have to be reported to frameworks that were mentioned by Mark in the previous session. UNECE, you have to report how much nitrogen emissions you've got from production. But what we also know from satellite monitoring is those inventories are underreported. Twice the amount of emissions than industry says they're emitting. So we've got to do better. When we're moving from fossil ammonia to renewable ammonia, we need to make sure that we're not maintaining those same levels of leaks and losses, not only because it's bad for the environment, but also it's costly. If you're losing 1 or 2 or 5% of the fuel that you're making, then that's a price. So you've got to make sure that we've got the taps on nice and close for there. In transport, well, ammonia is a gas that needs to be kept cooled. You get boil-off gases, and there's venting for safety. You've got emissions at storage terminals. We need to control there and make sure that we're capturing those emissions, and we're making sure that circular systems, we're not creating pollution. At bunkering, we need to make sure we're not having spills in our ports. We need to make sure that we're not harming the air quality, because ammonia is an air pollutant, but it's also a water pollutant. On board, we need to make sure leaks from seals or boil-off gases. The big one, when you're burning ammonia as a fuel, the exhaust, if you have that exhaust, you could have NOx or nitrous oxide emissions. So we need to have rules that the engine manufacturers and ship owners are preventing those emissions to the environment. And we have the technology to do that, but we need to have the rules in place. Finally, if we have emissions along this value chain, we end up with deposition. Airborne reactive nitrogen can fall back into the ocean, where it causes eutrophication, those dead zones I already mentioned, and bacteria in the oceans can then convert it through the nitrogen cascade back to nitrous oxide. This is a well-to-wake problem that needs solving, and we need to do it with the perspective of from the source to the sea, as the our colleague from UNEP in the first session explained. So what are the stakes? It could go either way. We could be solving a problem and reducing reactive nitrogen emissions in comparison to the conventional fuels they're replacing. Let's not forget that global shipping is burning heavy fuel oil, marine diesel, and is already producing reactive nitrogen in the form of NOx emissions. We have NOx codes at the International Maritime Organization, but we also know that they don't go far enough. So we could actually improve the situation with these new fuels with tight controls. But if we have weak controls, we make the problem significantly worse. So what about the governance? Well, I mean, it's not all bad. The International Maritime Organization has moved to put some measures in place. We do have safety guidance for ammonia-fueled ships. We've got amendments to SOLAS, the safety regulations. We've got training standards, and we've got NOx technical code rules that are coming into force. But we've still got a hell of a lot that's missing. So we need to have a comprehensive package. We need to have mandatory regulations. We need to make sure that nitrous oxide is fully captured in the life cycle accounting. We need to make sure we have rules around effluent management, and we need to know how we respond to spills. And on top of all of that, we need to have mandatory monitoring and reporting of emissions. So, you know, we need to be able to do the sums to find out actually how much is entering the environment and how can we do better. So there's 6 priorities listed here. We need to make sure we're accounting for everything through the supply chain. It needs to be binding. So a part of those binding measures is making sure that we do get that net zero framework, and we make sure that we've got comprehensive life cycle analysis that underpins that framework. We need to cap leakage and spills. We need effluent rules. We need to protect sensitive areas. So think of the coral reefs. Let's make sure we're not bunkering near sensitive environments. Let's not route traffic through oxygen minimum zones where nitrous oxide emissions will be greatest. Let's expand emission control areas, and let's apply precaution, because let's not repeat the problems that have come with LNG, with fossil gas as a fuel. The methane slip from fossil gas in ship engines has almost eradicated all of the climate benefit of switching to that fuel. So let's not make that same mistake. So on the question of governance, so like I said, I've got my foot in 2 worlds. I'm in the international nitrogen community, as well as being in the maritime shipping space. And in that community, we came up with some governance principles. So these are actually open, they're online. So there's so this is really a call to action to, you know, if you want to have good governance around ammonia, maybe go online, scan the QR code and sign up to support us in that call. So finally, decarbonizing shipping must not increase nitrogen pollution in the ocean. Whether we're looking at sewage diplomacy or ammonia as a ship fuel, we need to manage nitrogen across the whole cycle. And that's it. I'm going to hand over to my colleagues that are going to go into more detail.
Thank you so much. A big hand for Lucy again. Thank you. Yeah, so we've heard about the risks. So our next speaker will help us to examine their options. She's the Director of Global Shipping at the Environmental Defense Fund Europe, where she leads work on maritime decarbonization and sustainable fuel pathways. So today she'll explore the opportunities and challenges presented by alternative fuels for shipping. Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome Maria Hubertova.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming. I know the agenda of the conference is very busy, so we really appreciate you taking the time to come and be with us today. So I'll take a step back from what Lucy spoke about, which is very detailed about ammonia, and I'll talk more in general about alternative fuels for maritime shipping and how to actually make sense of all of them, because there are many on the table and it is very hard to understand which ones really are sustainable and how they can benefit not just the climate, but also the environment and people. So, alternative fuels. If we are aiming to defossilize the world or move away from fossil fuels, we need to find something to move to. That's why we are talking about alternative fuels today. Besides that, they are potentially offering good economic and geopolitical advantages. So when we move to decarbonization, we of course want to find the most efficient way to do it. And well, just don't look at the slide now. It's electrification. That's the easiest way to decarbonize. But not everything can be decarbonized through electrifying, at least not today, because the technology does not exist. So so-called hard-to-abate sectors, which are heavy-duty transportation, heavy industry, in short, those sectors that move very heavy things for long distances, or sectors which need a lot of power, for example, to heat to a very high temperature. We are not currently able to electrify them. That's why we need alternative fuels. Making alternative fuels can be very good for your economy if you do it well. It can boost your job market. It can offer 2 to 3 times more jobs than producing or extracting and processing conventional fuels. It can also be very good for your resilience and energy security at national or regional level. In Africa, up to 75% of consumption of refined oil relies on imports. That's right. There are fossil fuel reserves in Africa, yet 3/4 of the consumptions is imported. That makes it very expensive. Africa has one of the best, probably the best, and I know Dr. Della will talk about it after me, renewable potential. There's so much sunshine. It can power all of Africa, meet all of the domestic demand, and also be a net exporter of those fuels, which are ultimately made with sunshine and water. John. Thank you. So as I said before, there are many fuels. Too many. It's so many that you probably can't read it as if you're sitting at the back of the room. Sorry. But very few of them are actually sustainable. So how do we make sense of all of it? We have to look at the whole value chain of a fuel. How we make it, what does the transportation, what does the storage look like, and what we do it, what's the end use, what does the, in our case, because we are talking about shipping, what does the combustion look like? And as you heard from Lucy, even what happens after. So when we talk about shipping, we are currently using heavy fuel oil, very low sulfur fuel oil, and marine gas oil. In the yellow and blue boxes, you can see the fuels that are being considered most generally as potential alternatives. The yellow boxes are fuels based on bioenergy. So there are different types of bioethanol, there's bio-LNG or biomethane if you want, and there's biomethanol. The 2 blue boxes are fuels that are derivatives of hydrogen. We talk about renewable hydrogen, so that means hydrogen made with water and renewable energy. So the 2 fuels are e-ammonia and e-methanol. And to make it more complicated, one thing is looking at greenhouse gas impact. So we heard from Lucy specifically for ammonia that we shouldn't be looking only at carbon dioxide emissions, we have to look at nitrogen, and we also should be looking not just at the direct impacts, but also indirect. But there's much more to it. It's not just about climate, because we might well solve the climate crisis while making an another one. So we also need to look at pollution, and that's pollution of air, it's pollution of water, it's pollution of land, it's toxicity, it's everything that affects human health and ecosystem health, which also includes ocean health, of course. We also need to assess fuels on a full life cycle basis. So really from the starting point of the production all the way to combustion and potentially beyond. And lastly, we need to implement, or we need to look at fuels from a holistic point of view. So we need to look at the whole system and really consider whether the alternative is the best option for the sector or for the segment we are trying to decarbonize. So as I said before, the best and most efficient option is electrification. It cannot be used everywhere, but it should definitely be considered. Promoting a solution just for the sake of the solution is not the right way. And here you can see, time-wise, here you can see the assessment applied to ammonia. So as you can see, again, as mentioned, Lucy and Ambassador Nancy also spoke about it. There are potential, ammonia can be great if it's used properly and if it's regulated well. So it has the potential to reduce emissions by almost 90% compared to what we are using now. But also maybe not if we don't do it properly. So there's a high risk of N2O emissions, there's a high risk of hydrogen and ammonia slip throughout the value chain. And if we do not understand the risks, then we cannot address them, right? So really making sure that we know what those potential problematic points in the value chain are. If we don't do it, if we don't know it, then we cannot regulate them, then we cannot prevent them, we cannot mitigate them. So the solution for that is to, of course, minimize combustion emissions and making sure that we don't have any leakage, any slip throughout the value chain. The same goes for pollution, whether it's pollution of air or water. There's a really big potential, a really good potential for ammonia to reduce all different types of tailpipe emissions. But also, if we don't do it properly, there is a significant risk of degrading air quality, especially in ports, and also harming aquatic ecosystems. So again, we have to make sure that we minimize those emissions at combustion and that we do not leak and spill. When it comes to full life cycle, we want to make sure that we use the right kind of electricity. I spoke about it before. We want to make sure that it's, of course, renewable, but it's additional. So that means that it doesn't divert green electricity from other uses where it could potentially then be replaced by fossil energy, that it's local and hourly matched. And then again, alternatives. Making alternative fuels based on hydrogen is very inefficient. You need a lot of renewable energy to make the fuel. You need a lot of renewable energy to power the hydrolyzer and the whole process. And there are very big losses. So the losses can be up to 90%, which really is a lot, by the way. So if you compare it to direct electrification, the losses there are less than 50%. So it can be almost double, and that's a very big difference to me. So we really want to make sure that we electrify whatever we can. For shipping, it's vessels like ferries, coastal ships, and so on. And we also want to make sure that we use shore power in ports so that vessels that come to ports just plug in and switch off their engines. And that's for the sake of the climate, but also for the sake of all the communities that live close to ports and breathe the air. And just to close, here are stuff is happening. Stuff is happening in Africa. I think it's very exciting. So here are the 5 forerunners in Africa. You can see that almost all of them, with the exception of Egypt, have chosen ammonia as their primary fuel. And then in the longer run, looking into methanol as well. For Egypt, it's the other way around. I think it's great, and there's much more potential than this. But also because we see things are already happening, it is really important to make sure, as Lucy mentioned before me, and as Ambassador Nancy spoke about as well, that we have very stringent regulations and rules in place, because once those fuels get on the sea, we want to make sure that they do only good to the environment, to the people, and to the climate. That's it from me. Thank you.
Feeds more than 3 billion people. Our ocean quietly shields all of us, and we can see that in the 2022 publication of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC. The report that ocean absorbs more than 90% of the excess heat we have trapped, and close to a quarter of our carbon dioxide. Needless to say, the ocean, which you can see, has been our environmental guardian and protection for years, and as such, makes complete sense to theme this conference, Our Ocean, Our Heritage, Our Future. So whatever we do to decarbonize ships that cross these oceans must leave it healthier and not damaged. And so my work has been focusing on the International Maritime Organization's ambition to decarbonize shipping. And with this in the background, I offer 4 propositions on the back of what we've heard from previous speakers. John, please help. My first proposition is this: Africa's priority is electrification. Maria started this point for me by talking about the potential of this continent. But let me emphasize this. This continent, my motherland, which I'm really proud of, holds the means to achieve the electrification there. But pay attention to the screen, because you can hardly see the other picture next to the bright one. And this is the African reality. The next time you're flying from another country or another continent into Africa, I want you to try and sit by the window. And if you're flying at night, to just look out. When we start coming into Africa, this is what it looks like. You can see just at the very, your right, you can see a bit of light, but Africa is mostly dark. And the reality, ladies and gentlemen, is that 400 million Africans today do not have access to electricity. I want you to hear that in the context of energy transition. And yet, Africa holds, according to studies, about 60% of the world's best solar resource. However, just check out that other, the other picture that says drenched in sun by day. 1% of installed solar capacity is what we have on this continent. And so you see this asymmetry. And as a researcher, I'm saying to myself, we hold so much promise. Why are we here? And so when you hear decarbonization, please, I want you to just in your mind, because a lot of people I research with and I work with, because I work with governments in Africa, they don't like that word, like decarbonization. What does that even mean? I want you to think the term energy transition. And I can see some people smiling because I think it resonates with them. energy transition is what we should think about. And I want to anchor this first proposition on this. Africa holds so much promise. We have sun, we have water, we're a continental island for goodness sake. We have land, we have a thriving youth population, we have wind. And every time you hear energy transition, when you think about Africa, think renewable. Everything we're looking at on that slide are renewables. Maybe not so human beings, because we have a time that we leave this world, but we are replaced by others. But look at that, sun. Every time we sleep, we wake up, we come to sun, and we have an average of 6 to 8 hours of it in every single country in Africa. That's why we have so much high solar irradiance. Water, we're surrounded by water. Wind, there are some countries, not all countries, that have wind power that can generate electricity. That's not everything. There's geothermal as well. There's connected to water is hydroelectricity. And when we think about the translation of sun to solar energy, electricity, water to hydroelectricity, hydropower, wind to wind energy, what connects us to why we're here talking about ammonia is that without renewable energy from these renewable sources, you cannot have your green hydrogen, you cannot have green ammonia, you cannot make a claim of green without this. So my fellow Africans in the room and our friends, if indeed we have this amazing opportunity to both fix the 600 million deficit that we have of people not accessing electricity and the ability to produce fuels, then we can, if you go back, please, we can have clean cooking, we can power our houses, hospitals, we can also be at the forefront of producing green ammonia. We can also power our ports. And so this proposition is that without the green power of Africa, because of the huge amount that we have, we cannot have the green fuels that the entire world, especially in shipping, requires. And so we're at this huge advantage point that I would love for us to take with our own hands. But there is a caution. The trap that we must avoid is that for generations, Africa has sold her raw materials and bought back finished products at a higher price. We've exported low crude oil, in the days of the oil boom, and we've imported high value refined oils. If you were doing business, you will not do it that way. So we must not recreate the pattern of the green in this green era with what we learned from the past. Africa's part cannot be to export molecules and import value. That is not going to grow us. It must be to keep the value at home, provide for our own people, and then export the value to others. And that brings me to the third proposition. Is a proposition of caution. These fields that we have this massive potential to lead and produce, they are not benign. What I mean by that is they are not harmless. We heard from Lucy, we've heard from Ambassador Nancy as well, we heard from Marie. Reactive nitrogen and nitrous oxide carry real danger to human health, to air, and to the ocean. And nitrous oxide is itself a potent greenhouse gas. We have seen on this very continent what follows when a new field is pursued without care. You know, my background is Nigeria, and so I'm familiar with what happened during the Ogoni land. And you would probably know it as the Niger Delta, oil spill age, where care wasn't taken when oil companies were drilling and exploring oil. And now we're coming to a new phase where the handling of ammonia has already recorded deaths. And I don't say this to scare anybody, it's just for us to be aware. By the port of Dakar in 1992, seems so far away, but it's happened. The failure of a single tank released 22 tons and took 129 lives. I recall this to bring this point to you. We are at the very beginning of changing the world economy from a fossil fuel economy to a new e-fuels economy. And at this stage of fuel development, the health and well-being of human and aquatic life must come first. It must be encoded in our standards and in our regulations rather than added because it was an afterthought after the first accident. And this is my point. That is why Africa must help lead this transition, especially for the global south, and help to regulate these fuels and not merely receive rules, even though we're sitting at the table, just like Ambassador mentioned. And so my fourth and final proposition concerns how we proceed. And it is at the heart, John, is at the heart of my submission. Would you partner with us today, our friends from the global north, and also all of us in Africa? Can we join hands and ignore the, I call it dubious lines that divide us? Because Africa is one continent. And we are at a unique place today to actually make a difference for the entire continent, but we cannot do it as countries. We have to do it as a continent. And so partnership must be intentional. The rules of the new energy era must be co-developed. It must be co-produced. It must be co-designed. The architecture must be with Africans, and we must co-lead. Because without this, we're saying our ocean, our heritage, our future, it would just be a slogan. I'm sure some of you are familiar with this term, a just and equitable transition that leaves no one behind. Africa is already behind. And so today, how do we catch up and how do we even lead? And that starts with us rethinking how we engage the energy transition and how we see ourselves. And so Africa's participation must reach beyond just sitting at the table. We are at the table at the IMO, but I've seen a transformational change since I started my work at this United Nations organization, where Africa is beginning to speak with conviction, with power, because we're developing evidence, and that must continue. And coupled with negotiating and saying, this is how we want it to be developed, I dare say, everything associated with the life cycle development of fuels must have Africa at the table. And so the case for acting together is sound, since well-designed ocean action requires us to ensure we're at the table. So I leave you with this. Let us electrify Africa. You see that first slide where everything was dark? I am hoping in the next decade that would have changed massively. Let us make our fuels truly green. To claim that a fuel is green, it must come from renewable energy. By the time Africa is developing her renewable energy, she's prioritizing herself, producing fuels, and then we're having a better world and more jobs for our youths. Let us regulate these fuels so that no life is ever the price of progress. And let us write the rules together, with Africa leading rather than complying. And when you do that, and we secure not only cleaner ships, but we will secure healthier people, healthier ocean, and a thriving continent. That is how our ocean becomes our heritage and our future. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. A big hand for Dr. Dollar again. Yeah, that was a moving call to action, and it made me ask myself, what kind of headline, if we move in this direction, what kind of headline are we going to be seeing in 2036? Like, have you tried to ask yourself such a question? Like, if we do these things, what will happen in the next 5 years, 10 years? You know, so I'm really excited about that. And to really bring this home, because we've had three wonderful speakers. So we've been given a picture of the risks involved and why nitrogen matters. And then we looked at how alternative fuels may help in reshaping shipping. And third, we've actually just been reminded that, you know, there's a lot at stake for Africa. So to help us bring together and explore where these perspectives converge and where important questions remain, I want to welcome back all the three speakers so we can really delve into this conversation for a few minutes. Sorry? Oh, yes. And we are very lucky because our very own keynote and guest speaker will also be joining our panel. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back our keynote speaker and our presenters, please. Thank you. Welcome. I think we'll share the microphones. Right, so I'll start with let me start with Lucy, because the last time I heard about nitrogen, for some people here, maybe they were in class, you know, it was an academic exercise, but you really brought it home for us to see what this means for our daily lives. So I wonder what you think around, you know, the nitrogen dimension in this transition. What does that mean for policymakers and regulators? What should they be thinking about when it comes to alternative fuels? And what is the one consideration you really believe should be front of mind here?
I think the consideration that needs to be at the forefront of regulators' minds is that nitrogen is a problem in of itself, and there's an interaction between the carbon and the nitrogen cycle. And so when you've got excess nitrogen in the environment, it becomes part of a nitrogen cascade, which has, as we heard, all sorts of different environmental challenges. But at the moment, we're not considering all of those, especially in the International Maritime Organization. And how we're tackling these problems is quite siloed. And so I think one of the things and one of the motivations for me, like coming here to our oceans and collaborating with our friends in Sewage Diplomacy, is that we need to get joined up thinking between the supranational organizations. So we need to have joined up thinking between the missions of UNEP, the UN Environment Agency, and we need to have the International Maritime Organization also understanding, you know, that it's not just a climate challenge. there's a nitrogen challenge that needs solving, and these interact. So, just because ammonia is a zero carbon fuel doesn't mean it doesn't have environmental consequences. And in addition to that, we also need to make sure that there's some sort of like little underlying tweaks that are made to our kind of climate frameworks as well. So at UNF, at CCC, and with where we talk about our climate commitments, and with the International Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, we need to make sure that we've got emission factors for nitrous oxide emissions that are relevant for the marine environment. At the moment, we have an emission factor that's designed around agriculture, because right now, agriculture is the biggest problem. It's 80% of the problem. But that's not going to be the case in the future. We've got 80% agriculture, 20% industry, and industry comes from, chemicals and also fossil fuel combustion, etc. But that industry component is going to become a lot bigger, and we're going to be displacing that pollution, from being sort of on land or in water courses and then flowing into the ocean to actually there being much more deposition potentially on the ocean. So we need to just make sure that we get those sort of underlying tweaks to make sure we've got the right emission factors, we're doing the right science to inform evidence-based policy, and we make sure that the nitrogen story is embedded
Hello, everyone. Once again, sorry, it looks like we've lost the signal temporarily in the room, so we're just working to get it back online for us all, and hopefully it will be back with us momentarily.
Local content aspect connects with our civil society. So those are some of the things I can give you like immediately from my mind. Yeah, really critical for us to actively engage and move things forward.
Yeah, you mentioned some benefits, and Madam Ambassador, maybe you can speak to that as well. How do we unlock jobs, investment, industrial development from a policy perspective? What do African governments need to do?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the previous two speakers. I think the first thing that African governments need to do is to move from sloganeering to talk about, into action, in the sense that they have to pipelines for, the bankable projects, and invite industry to come and deal with them. They have to create the necessary frameworks to de-risk, to an equal playing field for everybody, and also to bring the knowledge to their people. It's not just politics, sloganeering, and also letting people know that this is possible. Then the next thing we need to do is to build capacity. All this needs for a new job market. We're talking of production, the fuel production. You're talking of transport of that fuel. You're talking of storage and handling. Do we have the capacity among the seafarers? Do we have capacity among the port workers and anybody else who will deal with those fuels? And the time to do it is now, not later. Otherwise, we'll find a continent that has been left behind. We also need to create awareness among the communities. We cannot be the consumers of technology or solutions that have been tried elsewhere. So we need to create our own evidence-based, solutions, interpretations. She's just talked about how we need a lot of, we've got a lot of the resources that are needed to produce the fuel. But then what are we doing about them? Are we waiting for other technology which is not informed by the same resources that we have to come and be adopted in Africa when we have our own solutions that we could work with? And those are some of the things that we need to think about, create our own local-based and, with the basis of what we have, the wind, the solar, the energy. Somebody who is not exposed to that may not think of the solutions, but we need to start here and develop it for our people, for them to understand.
Yeah, well said. Thank you so much. Mari, you I'm sure you're aware, or at least based on the work that you've done, would you say that we're overlooking nitrogen and maybe looking at fuels through a carbon-only lens? Would you say that? And how would you turn that around or balance the equation?
Thanks, John. I mean, Dilla spoke just a few minutes ago about how beautiful you all are and how, it's because of the energy, right? Because you eat. Well, I mean, carbon as such is not a bad, it's not a bad guy, right? Like carbon is the basic stone of life. And I mean, just the word decarbonization. I mean, it's implicit, right? Like it's about carbon. So, and we heard it today many times, low carbon fuels, because that's the terms we use, right? So greenhouse gas emissions or impact of greenhouse gases are measured as equivalents of CO2, of carbon dioxide. So carbon is the most polluted, like in terms of volumes, is the most emitted greenhouse gas. We also have the best understanding of how carbon behaves. It's the perfect greenhouse gas, right? The global the global warming potential of carbon is measured in 100 years. I mean, it's a very easy calculation, right? I mean, that's what you want. It's the perfect greenhouse gas to measure whatever climate related. So that's why also maybe some of the other gases are a bit, I don't want to say forgotten, but maybe not so much in the spotlight. But that doesn't make them any less important in the negative way, of course, or any less potent than carbon dioxide. So I think this is actually very much related to the beginnings of, conversations about ammonia being the perfect candidate fuel to decarbonize the maritime industry, right? You know why? Because it doesn't have any carbon. If you want to look at methanol, there is a carbon. Well, how do you source the carbon? It needs to be sucked out from the atmosphere so that then you release it and the balance is zero. Well, you don't have to worry about that for ammonia because there is no carbon. But it is important, and I said it during my presentation as well, that the whole spectrum, and there is much more that we do not know than what we do know. So just a few years ago, we started to understand the warming impact of hydrogen, which is even today is not even classified as a greenhouse gas, though we know that it has a warming impact, direct and indirect, right? So I think decarbonization and carbon, it's a nice way to talk about it. It's an easy way to sort of measure and express. But at the same time, it is really important to look at the whole spectrum of direct and indirect climate impacts by all gases. And, only then we will get the full picture. Also, and I'm not sure this was mentioned today, but it is estimated that the transition to net zero for shipping will cost around $2 trillion. It's a lot of money. It is really a lot of money for us to be, opting for technologies that may not deliver what we need, right? So and I think that this is, and Dola also mentioned about academics. It is really important that we identify those gaps in knowledge and fill them, because only then we can make good investment decisions. We can design really good regulations, standards, and policies and management practices.
Wow. Talking about gaps, Lucy, are you seeing any gaps when it comes to what the science is telling us and some policy frameworks around the world? Are there some glaring gaps that you can speak to?
Oh my goodness, where do I start? There's quite a lot of gaps. there are gaps just in like the inventory. So, for example, international shipping, the nitrogen and emissions from international shipping don't go into the national inventories. So that's a gap. So that might not be a problem right now when, you know, we've just got the NOx emissions from conventional fuels, but that is a problem in the future if we're not, you know, properly accounting for whatever the air pollution emissions might be from ammonia. So that's a gap that needs filling. And why do we need to fill that? Well, because, you know, we need to make sure that we're not causing air pollution. We need to remember ammonia in of itself is a toxic, caustic chemical that causes air pollution. And, you know, there's studies that show that we could significantly increase air pollution with a sort of unmanaged transition. So that's a gap. We've also got a gap in that we're not taking into account the indirect climate forces. So at the International Maritime Organization, there was a debate at the last Marine Environment Protection Committee about what we're going to count in the 5th greenhouse gas study. As the NGO community, we called for indirect nitrous oxide and also hydrogen to be included in that, and it was rejected. And so that's a gap. If we're not even recording it and sort of mapping the problem, how are we going to make sure we're designing appropriate mitigation strategies? So that's a gap. And yeah, and then the gap that I talked about before is there's this lack of awareness that of all the different forms of reactive nitrogen in the nitrogen cascade that can impact the environment that could arise from shipping. So I think that that's a very, very important puzzle piece to fill. And I really, really hope that, you know, one of the things that we can agree, you know, after this is that we just get more awareness brought in on the environmental impacts to a place where like the International Maritime Organization, so that we can do the submissions, we can gather the evidence, and we can make sure we create a really robust systemic framework that tackles the challenge. Because as Marie said, you know, it's going to cost a lot, and we need to make sure that we get the impact.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for following the conversation. I hope our online audience is still there. Please, we're about to get into the questions from the audience. So even the online audience, you're welcome to ask your question. Just shoot your hand, and then I think our sound person will be able to turn on the audio for you. Ambassador, you said that we need local solutions, and I wonder if part of that is really thinking about how do we not turn local communities into guinea pigs, so that we have ideas but we don't know what their impact is to the local communities. How do we balance that?
I think, as has come very clearly from the science side, we need to be very sure that we put science, participation, and precaution into the mix. We need to design solutions with the local community involved from the beginning. Let them be part of the solutions we are seeking, and let us be transparent with them. Let's get their views. Even that awareness that has been said that, you know, there is little of, how much of awareness do the local communities have? And that is something that we must be sure that we bring them along with us. You can't have a just and equitable transition unless you bring everyone behind, not just at country level, but they're the people who are affected the most, like we've heard from the previous presentations. And therefore, it's so unfair not to let them know what's going on and what the solutions are being made for them. Let them understand. They've also got knowledge that may help in the transition, and we need therefore to involve them in the problems we are beginning. Let us have science that takes account of the issues that they are facing, and not science imported and solutions imported from other people's situations. Science that is from their own area, because it could be different.
Yeah. And also, Dr. Dola, maybe you can just also amplify this point, which is just around what you're discussing with us earlier, what you shared with us. that we have the resources as Africans. So how do we harness our value, our capability to realize these goals? Because again, you know, that slide of the dark Africa when you were flying by night, and the other picture was a bit, you know, sobering. Yeah. So how do we harness? We have all these things, our solar and other resources.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I wish I was I wish I was Elon Musk right now. The first trillionaire in the world. And maybe I can just jump into that industry and start, you know, developing alternative fuels. But a more serious note, before I answer that question, I want to connect it to something. And because I'm just sort of introspecting as we're having this conversation on the energy transition in the maritime sector and specific to shipping. To date, there isn't a policy that is under design that I think maybe equals the same that is happening at the IMO. And, you know, the progression of industrial development begins with a good policy that is designed. And so to be able to answer your question, John, and that is, there is the EU ETS, this is the European Emissions Trading Scheme, that is actually a unilateral framework that is already in motion. So when you put this into context, about 27 European countries have this binding agreement amongst themselves to decarbonize Europe. And that has come into the shipping space where Africa is beginning to pay for it. And if I tell you the revenue that is being generated per year, this should make us really pay attention to what the International Maritime Organization is doing, because that is a multilateral agreement or policy that is being designed by all countries that are member states. And we're looking at about 176 countries out of about 193 under the UN. So that is almost the whole of countries in the world. And what is critical and connected to this conversation is that we need to join hands and forces together to make that policy truly just for everybody, because there's nothing just about a continental framework or policy that doesn't flow money back to the people they're collecting it from, because everything that is going under the EU ETS does not flow back to Africa. And by the way, I've done enough study to see that Europe is Africa's largest trading partner. And so I want us to focus our attention on that this policy that is being designed at the IMO, we should pay attention to it and work together to make it work for all of us. That's number one. Imagine a world where we have that framework, because that framework underpins alternative fuel development across the world. Then we have industrial movement. So industry begins to move, businesses begins to move. And this is where I call on businesses in Africa, in people within the industrial sector. There is nobody that isn't touched, because if we start with electrification, as I said, that's Africa's priority. You can begin to think about mini grids at our ports. And imagine if all the ports in Africa have mini grids that is electrified using renewable energy. Not only will they look after ships when they come ashore, they will also be able to provide electricity to coastal communities. And that 600 million, you begin to see the numbers drop. And so for me, it's a no-brainer. Whatever I have in investment, when that time comes, I will put my money into it, because it's a way that we will thrive in this continent. because everybody depends on energy. When energy is missing today, you know what happens? I'm from Nigeria. Everybody have their own generating sets. Where do they get the generating sets from? China. What powers it? Fossil fuel. What is the result? Emissions. It doesn't make sense.
Wow. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, we think we'll get questions from the audience. So I will just move the microphone. Annette, if you could help, please.
Thank you, Dola. I think, Dola, I'm beginning with you. You're finalizing with when electricity fades in Nigeria, you turn to generators. That's what we call productive use of energy. But those are diesel pumps, which are actually increasing also the carbon footprint. Thank you for noting that, Dola. Now, let me also begin with what you've been mentioning. A common question: why could Africa decarbonize? You know, when it's fleet in the sea. First of all, my name is Caleb. I'm an energy and finance expert. I've been working on green hydrogen for some time. We have a project in Namibia called Aures Green Hydrogen. It's a fully fledged project on 5,000 hectares. We provide close to 370 Namibians working on this particular project in Namibia. Our aim by 2030 is to make sure that this particular project in Namibia gets to a 5 gigawatt of energy consumption using a 2.5 electrolyzer capacity. After that, we worked with ESCOM as well in green hydrogen in KwaZulu-Natal and Mpumalanga in South Africa. Maybe if I can come to Kenya, we worked in structuring an EU, European Union, Kenya, green hydrogen strategy and roadmap. That was in 2023, in which we came up with ways in which Nancy, Ambassador, is mentioned on bankable ways in which we are going to catalyze this particular emerging for the continent, but also to make it more home-based in Kenya. So after that, we've structured deals. The latest being, we've had a lot. We have an avalanche of projects that actually have come to the continent, specifically Kenya, but they've never seen the light of the day. Begin maybe from the policy that is not very favorable. The enabling environment is near. These are new more of technologies, but we've actually been working on ensuring, which is also the assignment I'm giving to Dola, to work on, how are governments going to ensure that we have a regulatory and policy framework that is actually helping these international bodies to come in. So last year, maybe I can give good news. After many years of back and forth, last year on November 3rd, we launched our very first green hydrogen, green ammonia-based fertilizer plant that is going to produce close to 250 ammonia-based fertilizers in a special economic zone in the other side of Rift Valley. For those who know, this coast of Kenya, where we have a special economic zone here, and this is something that I'll be doing when I'm here for this particular side event that we have been mobilizing. We have a special economic zone here. It's called Bonje Miritini. For those who come from the coast, is a special. Who comes from the coast here? You know Bonje Miritini? Who knows there? You know there. So we have a special economic zone there for a green hydrogen project that we are going to, ensure that we're using water from desalined water from the sea here, desaline it, and we use it to produce green hydrogen. The energy is actually from the solar that we are doing it. I just wanted to preempt that. I have so many questions for you. Dola,
yes.
How are we going to make sure that these particular projects, one of the problems we're having with green hydrogen is that governments in the continent are yet to realize that even if we have PPPs working on these particular projects, risk is actually not structurally correctly structured. Governments are not ready to take in the risk. And they think that when we come in with PPPs projects, is that the private sector is going to take in the risk that actually governments are going to take in the continent. So they need to come in book about this. This is something that we've pushed with the government of Kenya day and night, I can tell you that. And the government of Namibia has also been pushing in. And South Africa, Egypt as well. We have Mauritania. We have close to 6 governments in the continent that are actually ready to onboard green hydrogen technology. Number 2, for us to have bankable projects, which Ambassador Nancy is mentioning, there's only one particular way in which you're going to have bankable projects, and to ensure that our young people are going to get jobs in these particular initiatives. Before we do, what I can hear experts are mentioning on knowledge, which is skills transfer. Now, before skills transfer, we need to ensure that governments, if they are getting in touch with the private sector that is doing green hydrogen or green ammonia-based fertilizers or nitrogen, we can ensure long-term offtake agreements. That is one of the key ways that we've ensured Namibia project succeed, the Kenyan project succeed, and even the project that we are doing here in Bonje Miritini. Actually, to tell you the truth, that the Bonje Miritini project is actually a World Bank project in which we've secured close to a significant amount to make sure that we have electrolyzer and the technical capabilities, and we are going to ensure that, you know, the people or the young people working on it are from the local universities here. Now, secondly, the offtake agreements are going to make sure that governments in the continent can commit, even if we are having governments leaving power, which is a common trend in the continent. We're having what you call, when you go to the World Bank, they tell you we have perceived risk in the continent. One, in forex exchange. Number two, we have political risk. So to cure these two, first of all, we have to have long-term, you know, offtake agreements with governments so that even if a new government comes in power, the former signed offtake agreement is still going on. It's a going concern. We call it in finance. It's a going concern projects. So Dola, you're going to look into that. I want to really, it was not my day, so I want to rush quickly. Number two is on exporting raw materials that Dola you mentioned. Now on exporting raw materials, when we are doing the Namibia project, the Daures Green project is actually based on this on the desert side of Namibia. But the Walvis Bay, there's a southern seaside of Namibia called the Walvis Bay, in which we are doing a new project with the European Union. The Walvis Bay project is actually embedded on blended finance, which I had, Prof, you tried to mention that, on a blended finance structure in which we can risk is actually well structured with the governments so that in as much as we are doing new projects, governments don't need to take in more debt because economies in the continent are already under debt duress. So we don't need to chip in more debt. So I want to say that on exporting raw materials, I think, Dola, you mentioned we export raw materials to, we export molecules. That's a very good sign, actually, to mention molecules. And then we import value. On our side, we mentioned that, you know, when countries in the continent export raw materials, we export jobs, right? So when we export raw materials, we export jobs. And what do we import? We import poverty. So that is what, because when you import a finished product into the continent, you are creating jobs elsewhere. So you are importing in poverty. That makes a case which Ambassador Nancy is mentioning, that you are not going to be industrialized by becoming a consumer market. You cannot be that way. You must be industrialized by ensuring that you subsidize your production, which is also coming what Dola is mentioning. I'm finalizing. Now, on there's something you mentioned on coming up with bankable projects. Let me finalize with this one. Now, on coming up with bankable projects, governments, Dola, governments in continent must come up with an innovative financing mechanisms for green hydrogen projects, particularly innovative. A budgets for the continent cannot, I have to say this with unshakable resolve, that governments in Africa cannot foot green hydrogen projects. I've seen it from Namibia, I've seen it from Egypt, I've seen it in Kenya, I've seen it in Mauritania. There is no government that is going to foot from its revenue. We call it an OSR, own source revenue. Own source revenues cannot finance, you know, green hydrogen project. A particular green hydrogen project that can produce 100,000 metric tons of green ammonia-based fertilizers could cost close to $250, $300 million, which, you know, a government cannot foot on its own. So it needs a lot of partners, development partners, and a PPP project to be involved. CFDs, I don't want to preempt a lot of financial terms that actually sometimes may be so unpalatable for you. So I want to make sure that, please, you've heard the claims I'm raising. You know them, Dola. These are not new conversations to you. I know that you're going to take in more that I could have actually wanted to add on. But let me finalize on one thing. Let me finalize. I'm finalizing. Mary, you mentioned on actually ensuring this decarbonization in the continent. The problem we're having across governments is that decarbonization, the word itself is more of leaving a bitter taste in the mouths of many Africans. But a green transition, just like Dola you mentioned, a green transition is needed because fleets in the continent, you depend on it. We have fleets that are coming into the continent, but the continent doesn't own any of them. Close to less than 2.5%. The continent doesn't own any of them. So we need to ensure that a generation that is coming up is well prepared for this purpose. But again, we have to decarbonize. So we have to ensure that it's a fine line of walking, but you have also to be very smart in answering it. Thank you, Dola, and thank you for bringing this conversation. I could have gone more and more. I want to give time. I want to give time to anybody else.
So Caleb, I just want to ask the question. Was that questions? Because it was like you made a whole new presentation to all of us. We should have included you in the lineup.
Thank you so much.
No worries.
When we've been working together with us, so when actually Prof and the team there we are not meeting for the very first time, and you can see the way I'm making my presentation. So what if we met for the very first time, right? We've been knowing each other for so long. So what if we met actually for the very first time? So I like it because it's actually, you know, the way this actually the field that I work on both ends, on technical expertise and also on the financial aspect part of it. So I feel so happy to see that this conversation is more and more coming into the continent, because there's a deficit of information, especially at the top, but also amongst our young people.
Any other question after him? So just any other question?
Well, it's difficult to ask a question after the last speaker. I think, Dola, since you know each other well, ensure next time you put him on the panel. But mine is very simple. Dola, you mentioned about some use of terminologies, decarbonization, where some prefer to use energy transition. It might look simple, but how does those two terminologies, how do they affect the work that may be going on in Africa? Thank you.
Brilliant question. Thank you so much. Now, it might seem ordinary to people. That question is loaded. So Marie picked up on decarbonization, and then she was like, decarbonizing. What does that even mean? In her own way of talking, she was kind of hinting at something. So decarbonization focuses on carbon. However, greenhouse gas emissions, the three bad boys, are carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and methane. And as she beautifully said something that I will just point to, only two of them, when you think about the chemistry, the structure, two have carbon in them. Nitrous oxide doesn't have carbon. And so we have carbon molecules, nitrogen molecules, or emissions, or whatever you call it. Why I kind of move away from using the term, especially with my people, and I'm African, very proudly so, is that for me, I want to take the focus away from the term and place more focus on the action. What do I mean by that? Decarbonization doesn't mean much to people because they hear it as though it's a big word that needs deconstructing. So even at the cerebral level, they're like, please don't just be throwing stuff at me. What exactly are you hiding behind it? Because I think as a people, we have a history where we feel like things are being hidden behind big words. And decarbonization is a big word. But the decarbonization doesn't even capture what we're trying to do. If you want to talk about decarbonization, why don't you say reduce greenhouse gases? So that is on the one hand. But let's engage energy transition. That begins to tell me what decarbonization is trying to do. So we're moving from one energy to the other. I can talk from morning till night about energy transition. There is energy, which has a definition, and there's transition, which has a definition, and it is not complex. So the difference between the two is, one is telling me what we're trying to do that makes sense to an average person without big words. And the other one is a term that I have to be using too much time to be explaining to them about carbon, is it element of carbon, and then it is CO2 and all this stuff. Energy transition is simple. We live in a fossil fuel economy, a fossil fuel world, and is destroying our environment and the climate. And we're moving to cleaner energy sources that is good for our health, good for the ocean, and for Africa, it unlocks our prosperity. It's as simple as that.
Thank you so much. My name is Hadia Jilo. I come from Mombasa. I have an organization called Jure Culture and Tales, basically in the field of culture and heritage, preserving the indigenous knowledge. And this is just a comment. Even as we look into the local communities and around the coast, we should also consider the indigenous communities. They have a lot of rich knowledge that is undocumented and is just passed on informally. So when we look at these people and we bring them on board, we can surely have a lot of things and also make a lot of interventions. Thank you.
Could I just do a quick comment on that? Thank you so much for bringing that on. Every time we talk about ocean literacy, maritime literacy, in my head, the indigenous people's knowledge is critical to us. So in founding partner, Ambassador Nancy and myself, there is something that we thought about as we're breaking the groups down. So we have 4 cohorts. One of the cohorts is the civil society organization. And one of our cohort leads is actually a lady, I wouldn't mention her name because she's also Kenyan. She's an ambassador actually for the indigenous peoples. Yes, and so for us, they are so critical. I don't know if you knew about COP30, but they are so critical to this. There's so much we can learn from the indigenous peoples. So thank you for that. And thank you for the work you do.
Catherine, thank you so much for the presentations. I began listening online before I walked in, so I'm quite pleased and happy for all the information that has been shared. My question would be more in terms of, I'm glad that you talked about that there are different types of alternative forms of fuels that we need to consider all the options available. So my question is, foremost, are there any plans towards developing of papers and presentations regarding these other alternative options? So that's the first question that I had. And then the second question that I also had was in respect of, sorry, I don't know why I even removed these glasses, I'm getting old. So the second question that I had was maybe a bit more information regarding the submission that was made at the IMO just shutdown. I think if most of us may not be familiar with it, so it could give us a bit of information regarding the proposal that was made and what are the reactions from the community in terms of its progression. I think that would be a better way for us to probably consider that and see how we can progress with the other information available. And thank you very much for the gentleman, the financier who was here presenting from Namibia. I would want to say that every government has steps that it takes towards trying to actualize projects and initiatives. And I believe last year I came across a report regarding hydrogen production. And in that report, it revealed that indeed it's a capital intensive initiative, and governments need to be prepared for that. So now moving towards now further the other options that are available, maybe also the papers or the submissions that can be probably availed or considered, if they could also include the aspects of capital intensive or the capital input in terms of the production, the use, and the pros and the cons of the use of the alternative fuels. So that's what I had. Thank you.
Should I do the IMO? Okay, so I'll very quickly answer the question that was specifically about the IMO submission, and so that related to so is it every 5 years or every 4 years the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, does an inventory of the greenhouse gas emissions from shipping, and so this is coming up, and they needed to agree the terms of reference. And so what we asked was that in the terms of reference that we would also include the monitoring of emissions of ammonia and indirect nitrous oxide that could be produced from reactive nitrogen as well as hydrogen. And it got rejected. And the reason is the member states spoke up and said, oh, you know, the science isn't clear, you know, there's not enough known about this, it will make it confusing to do. Basically, we can't add more burden to this exercise. But it's kind of a bit of a chicken and egg problem because we're not monitoring it and we're not putting it in there, we're not recording it, and therefore we're not being aware that there's an issue, and it's sort of we're going in a loop, and the problem is that, you know, perhaps people that are coming to negotiate there, if you think about who ends up being on the delegations for member states, they're quite often people coming from transport ministries, and the people from the environment ministries, perhaps the people that are engaged in like nitrogen pollution issues, they're maybe not in the room. And so there's there's a bit of a knowledge gap and an awareness gap, but we're kind of going around in circles because we're not monitoring it. So therefore, it's not seen as a problem. And then going forward, it means that we're not then including these numbers in our LCA frameworks, in our life cycle frameworks, which means ultimately we might make bad decisions when we're trying to compare different options. So a little bit of detail about that submission, but I think, yeah, it's we've got work to do, basically, I think, to build the awareness, get more people on board. And there's a task for the science community to also provide the information in a way that's understandable to policymakers so we can fill those gaps.
I'll very briefly, John, very briefly talk to the fuels research. So I think there's a lot of research across the board happening, but much more is needed. So like, at EDF, we have spent quite a few years now researching ammonia from all different perspectives, whether it's life cycle emissions, whether it's air pollution, whether it's toxicity and impacts on marine biodiversity. We've done spill assessments, sort of trying to understand if there is a spill, how the spill behaves, how far it goes, how it behaves in different climates, different temperatures, different times of the day. But it's all estimates, right? Because we don't have a engine, and like luckily there has been no spill in the ocean so that we can learn from it. But I think much more research is needed still to fill the gaps. We've been working with Lucy on understanding better the impact of nitrogen, reactive nitrogen from the use of ammonia as marine fuel. We are now looking into methanol. So we actually currently have a work underway where we are assessing different methanol pathways, including both biomethanol and e-methanol, looking at different feedstocks, different sort of production, also distribution, right? If you make it in China and then you export it to Mombasa, so what it takes, what's the overall impact of that? We are doing a lot of research on biofuels, because biofuels, which I hope I will speak for everybody here, I guess we thought like 10 years ago that biofuels, especially first generation biofuels, were a closed chapter for shipping. Out of sudden, they're on the table again. So I think there's a lot of, not only within EDF, but across the research community, there's a lot of research done into biofuels at the moment. And also at EDF, we do a lot of hydrogen research. So we've been very much involved in understanding the hydrogen warming impact, including measurements, campaigns, and so on. But again, it's just drops in the ocean. There's so much work for everybody. And I think, it also needs to be recognized by those who support research institutions and NGOs to sort of prioritize that type of research, because if you only support the sort of advocacy part, well, you still need the data, right? You still need to understand what you should be advocating for.
Only, and then we close, please. Thank you. Because you're standing between us and cocktail.
Thank you. My name is Hussein Muhammad from Kisauni Polytechnic. So we've talked massive about embracing used water and global shipping while waiting for the big projects. Why don't the government, my question is, why don't the government work directly with local and tech students to build and run neighborhood resource recovery hub? It might seem dangerous, but if the students and also the local youths get highly trained, yeah, we can get something from them. Yeah, I think.
I think that question was for your county minister.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think also they can answer my question.
Okay,
yeah.
Someone would like to take that?
Thank you.
Well, I was smiling when you were talking with conviction. And the reason being is because of people like you and your colleagues that are here and some of the other students in your polytechnic that the partner initiative exists. So we're a technical NGO, and our focus is to bring people that are in academia, in Africa, together for us to create knowledge. We've heard from Marie, we've heard from everybody here, Ambassador and Lucy, and I said it as well, that we have gaps. For Africa to fill that gap, it's not going to fall from heaven. We need to, and I wrote something here as the conversation was becoming bigger and more interesting. We need to convert Africa into a knowledge economy. Everywhere you see development happening, industrialization happening, progress, they are continents and peoples that value knowledge development. And what you've just shared, even though I half understand it, sounds like something that you're convinced about, that you just need the juice, I'm talking about money, to probably be able to pull yourself together and start developing that knowledge. We need local knowledge development in Africa, because the solution that works in a very cold country like Russia, like UK, will not work in Africa. We see it in some of our buildings where we now need to put air conditioning in the building, when if you cast your mind back, my background is engineering, if you cast your mind back to how buildings were developed, they were passive houses made of clay, where when it is day, the inside is cool because there's sun outside, and when it's night, it's the opposite. What happened to that technology? We could have continued developing it, but we moved to cement, and now we've caused climate problems with cement because it's one of the hard to abate sectors. And so what I want to encourage every single person here to do is to engage with knowledge, value it, because it becomes a catalytic effect. Your friends will see, okay, you're studying, everybody's talking about, oh, I have this idea, and starts writing a paper. Please put what you just said to us today, start writing a proposal and send it to me. Because knowledge needs to be developed that is good and right for us. That is the only way we can start moving towards true energy transition that doesn't leave us behind. Thank you.
Mine will be very, very brief. I am a certified peace ambassador from IAP, that is Institute of Peace and Institute of Economy and Peace, Australia. And we are in a transition in our country whereby next year we'll be having our general elections. So mine is to urge the local people and the international community to create a conducive environment for everything that we've been discussing here to take place peacefully and in a harmonious way, so that we can achieve all whatever we've discussed here, 100%. Otherwise, without peace, everything we've discussed here will just be as nothing. So mine is to urge our local community and the international community to embrace peace during this transitional period so that we can achieve maximally. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. You didn't tell us your name. Did you say your name?
My names are Gala Athman. I am a lecturer, ICT lecturer, as well as a peace ambassador based in Nakuru, but from Mombasa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carla. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yes, and to just tie on to what Carla has shared with us, maybe I'd like to also ask our esteemed panel to give us a call to action as we bring this to a close. And how I'd like to go with this is just start with our ambassador, then I'll go to Marie, then Lucy, then Dr. Dola will close it off for us. Yeah.
We've talked a lot. Thank you for the question. We've talked a lot, and we've been reminded there's another transition happening, but the one we've been talking about, I think the measure of success in that transition is to have a transition that leaves oceans stronger, healthier, communities also involved, and no one behind. That's so we have our work cut out for us to say.
I will say something very much along those lines as well. I think when we plan for the transition, we really need to have a systemic, holistic approach, looking at not just all the impacts, not just the bad ones, which I appreciate we mentioned quite a few today, but also the good ones, all the co-benefits for local communities, for ecosystems, and for the economy. And I'm sure there are many, but let's just use the transition in a way that works for those who need it.
So I'm going to make a call for governance and good governance and governance principles. So at the end of my presentation, I shared the 6 governance principles which have been developed by our nitrogen science community. So that's a practical call to action. If you like what we've been saying here and you also believe in good governance, then sign up to those principles and let's bring those to the various governance organizations and we can put them into practice.
Much has been said today, and I agree with everything that my distinguished panelists and friends have said. And for me, I would like for us to turn these conversations into action. And what I'm calling for is actually to build a coalition. Today, I'm inviting all of us to come together and join all of us, and I'm hoping beyond this room, wherever this is streamed and whoever will be listening in the future, for us to join hands to form a coalition for sustainable fuels for Africa. Because everything we've said today is foundationed on the principle of justice, equity, inclusivity, and what I will call love. That is what would make us overcome the challenges that we have today. Africa is already behind in many ways, but I have this, I don't even understand where the hope comes from, and hope is not a strategy, by the way, but I have this hope that is built on the work that we're doing today, that we are already making progress. I remind myself of what we were able to achieve the last MEPC meeting as a continent. Ambassador was there leading the way as well. We did things that had never been done before in this UN environment. And so hope is turning into what I see as belief. And so the Coalition for Sustainable Fuels for Africa is an idea where we join hands together to carry this work into implementation, to hold the safeguards, like Lucy has been saying, we have described, to share the benefits with coastal communities and nations, and to report its progress when next we convene. And so my question to those of you that are physically in person in this room is, do you think this is a good idea? Can I have a show of hands? And I would like somebody to take the photo. Do you think it's a good idea to actually come together and work towards having a coalition of sustainable fuels for this continent? There you go. So please, we're going to have cocktail. Please come and speak to us about it. It's just an idea that we all agreed, you know, we will float after we've spoken, because much will be said in this Our Ocean Conference, this 11th Our Ocean Conference. But how many things will be done? And I'm a doer. I've proven it with my work of about 30 years now. I always do. I don't like just talking. And I don't work in an environment where I'm not convinced that I should be in. And that's why I like practical stuff. And so thank you for raising your hand. I'm hoping to engage with you. I'm hoping that the next time we see each other, we would not say, you're a stranger. Oh, I saw you last year. Oh, it'll be that we've been working together. Hello, friend. Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So this will be written, this story will be written in 2036, like I was prophesying, and you know, it will be because we are taking many small steps together, all of us here, you know, like we say in Kiswahili, haba na haba, hujaza kibaba. Yes, little by little fills the measure. So that's what we're living here with. So thank you to our speakers, to our esteemed speakers. Please give a big hand to all our speakers. Thank you so much for sharing your experience, your insights with us and ideas. We really appreciate it. To all our partners, we cannot mention all of you here. Thank you so much for making this happen. I want to thank everyone who joined us today. For all of you who are here today, thank you so much. Those who are joining us from Teams online, thank you so much.